Hi, and welcome back to the third place. Have you ever attended an event where you didn't know anyone there? Maybe you went by yourself, try to meet new people, regardless of the theme, whether it was professional or for socialization or whatever, um, and you just couldn't get into the conversation. There's people there that obviously know each other. They're talking, hey, how's it going? Long time no see. But you're just kind of standing awkwardly there by yourself, unable to start a conversation. Well, if you have, you're definitely not alone. And this is what motivated me to talk about this particular subject. Why are we designing events so badly? Especially when it comes to meeting new people. If it's things like networking events, for example, or even events to meet new friends, potential new friends, shouldn't there be I don't know, some sort of a mechanism for that to happen instead of hoping that people are all extroverts, that they're gonna approach people? Well, I think that we can do that, but the question is, how can we do that? If the point of an event is for people to kind of catch up, people that know each other, then that's great. But when events, especially networking events, are advertised as such, where there's an implied expectation that if you attend this event, it's an opportunity to meet people, and then the environment doesn't actually support the guests in doing so, it seems a little counterintuitive. It seems a little ridiculous, if you ask me. I think mechanisms such as icebreakers are very important. If you're gonna have an event, and this is most of all the organizer's responsibility, if you're gonna have an event for people to meet each other, you should probably set something up to kind of condone that. Voluntary, obviously, you want people to actually, engage with by their own will. It doesn't have to be awkward, one of those things that's come on, you have to do this, and then everyone just awkwardly kind of agrees with hesitance. I'm not talking about that. If you have an event, you need to have a little corner of the event at the very least, I would say, where people can come in and I don't know, get to know each other. Of course, facilitated by uh, the organizers. And I don't think it's that difficult. If it's voluntary, if it's a part of the event, I don't see a reason why that shouldn't happen. I don't see a reason why there can be something like a round table of people um, talking about each other. Hi, my name is so and so. I work here, and these are my hobbies, my passions, whatever. That way, there's a starting point. Here's another crazy idea. Why not have little cars on the table, like starter points? Oh, you like sports? Oh, I like sports. Oh, you like fashion? Oh, I like fashion. Right? But whichever events I've been to, I've very, very rarely seen these mechanisms. Like, it doesn't have to be icebreakers. It can be something else, right? It can even be something as simple as the facilitators, the organizers, basically saying, "Hey, this is this person. Hey, this is this person." Basically introducing them to each other. But it seems to be a huge gap in most event types, and I feel like a lot of people probably don't attend events because of this. Whichever community it is, it doesn't matter if it's, religious or neighborhood wise or whatever. If it's an environment where, there's a certain group of people who are already kind of in, they know each other and they kind of catch up and everything, and there's newcomers, so to speak. They don't really know many people, if anyone, but they're not really catered to, right? I'm not claiming I have all the answers. I can say, all right, well, icebreakers are one way, the cue cards are another, introducing people are another, whatever. If you have any ideas, leave it down in the comments, something that I haven't mentioned. um there's, I'm sure, countless ways to kind of facilitate this, but it's just not happening, and I don't get it. um if you're gonna throw an event that kind of, the purpose is this, you should probably think about these things. Not everyone is an extrovert, not everyone has the social skills to kind of go ahead and do that, and talk to people, and a lot of people have tried, myself included. I've been to events where I would have tried to talk to people, and a lot of times it went well, but sometimes it kind of, it's awkward. um so I think it's an important talking point, but it shouldn't be left as a talking point. I think that people should definitely kind of, uh, well, organizers should definitely kind of look into it. Now, hopefully, I'm not being too ignorant here. I am aware that there are probably communities out there that do actually facilitate the integration of newcomers, that they probably have things like icebreakers. Um, I'm just talking from my own personal experience. I've had good experiences at events as well. To be fair, I've also organized events in my communities, and I'm also, to a degree, at fault for not having such mechanisms at most of my events. So hopefully this doesn't come as across as some sort of a harsh criticism towards organizers. I think it's important to kind of distinguish that. I think it's a little disclaimer that I want to put out there. What a lot of organizers do is very well intended. They invest their time into it, their energy. They're doing something that most people in a community don't actually do, right? They invest themselves. A lot of the times, their heart and their soul into it. So hopefully, like I said, this isn't coming across as too harsh towards organizers. I'm not trying to like wag my finger here and be like, why aren't you guys putting any icebreakers? Shame on you and whatnot. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just trying to kind of thinking like on a global scale, how can we be better, rather than like point fingers at specific people who are actually like doing something within communities, trying to keep them alive or get them going. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So you don't think I'm like dunking on organizers here. Um, but I do think it's important to kind of have a look at that, and we are probably going to have um, actual community organizers, community leaders come in at other episodes and future episodes of this show, of this podcast, and talk about their challenges. About this. Maybe they have tried it. It hasn't worked. I'm trying to weigh all the options, right? I don't want to be biased towards one perspective and ignore the other one. Maybe things haven't tried, haven't been successful. I'm just speaking from what I've seen across the board, that there aren't really like that many mechanisms in my experience, right? Maybe it's in the circles that which I move in. If your experience differs from this, say so in the comments, right? Maybe we can learn from your community, but nonetheless, I do think it's a good it's a good direction to go in as a global society, wherever you're located, wherever you're watching this from, whichever communities you're part of. When it comes to meeting new people, I do think it's important, especially if you're an organizer, or if you know organizers, maybe you can send them this video, to kind of incorporate these things and make your events better. Because if the intent of an event is to grow the community, my personal opinion is that the role of an organizer doesn't actually end with just the uh, setup logistics, right? The role of the organizer is also to facilitate these introductions, these in-event activities, like I mentioned, the icebreakers and so on. But it is important also to see what authors, researchers in the space have talked about, and let's see what conclusions they've come to. One researcher whose work I think offers an interesting perspective on this topic is Amy Edmondson, who is a professor at the Harvard Business School. Now, Edmondson wasn't studying community events or how strangers make friends or anything related to that, but instead her research focused primarily on workplaces and teams. One of the surprising things that she observed was that the highest performing hospital teams actually reported more errors than the lower performing teams. At first glance, that seemed backwards. Were the best teams really making more mistakes? Well, as it turned out, they weren't. They simply felt safer admitting them. The team members were willing to speak up because they didn't feel embarrassment or blame. Through that work, she developed the concept of psychological safety. She described it as a shared belief that a group is safe for interpersonal risk taking. That's a bit of an academic definition, so what does it actually mean? Well, it means people feel comfortable doing things that carry a social risk. Asking a question without worrying they'll sound stupid. Admitting they made a mistake. Offering an idea that might not work. Or disagreeing respectfully with someone else. Or in other words, people participate because they don't expect to be embarrassed, rejected, or ridiculed for speaking up. One thing I find particularly interesting is that psychological safety doesn't eliminate risk altogether. There's always some uncertainty whenever we interact with other people. What it does is reduce the perceived social cost of participating. It makes taking that first step feel less intimidating. I think approaching a stranger at a social event is also a form of interpersonal risk taking. Like, think about what happens when you walk into an event where you don't know anyone. You can look around the room, see groups of people, they're already talking to each other, some are laughing, absorbing conversation, and then the voice in your head starts asking questions. Like, do they know each other already? Would I be interrupting if I was to kind of jump in? What if they don't want to talk to me? What if it's awkward? Those are all tiny social risks. None of them are like life-changing, but together they're often enough to stop someone from ever taking that first step. So here's a question that I start asking myself. If organizations can intentionally create environments where employees feel safe enough to contribute ideas, ask questions, and admit mistakes, why couldn't community organizers intentionally create environments where people feel safe enough to introduce themselves to someone new? We often treat awkwardness at social events as though it's just part of human nature. We tell people you have to put yourself out there, just be more confident, go talk to someone. But I wonder if we're asking the wrong questions. Instead of asking, why aren't people talking? Maybe we should ask, what have we done to make talking easier. Imagine if we designed every other experience this way. Imagine walking into a supermarket where nothing was labeled. No aisle signs, no categories, no staff to help you. When customers couldn't find what they needed, will we blame the customers? Or would we say the supermarket was poorly designed? Yet that's often what we do with social events. We put 100 strangers into a room, assume conversations somehow magically happen, and when they don't, we conclude that people just aren't social enough or that they just don't care enough. I don't think that's the whole story. I think event design matters quite a lot. I'm not saying that organizers can like manufacture friendships. Obviously, they can't. They can't guarantee that two people will get along, that they'll have chemistry, but they can lower the barrier to that first conversation. They can reduce the uncertainty and create opportunities where introducing yourself feels expected instead of awkward. They can replace that feeling of, I hope I'm not bothering anyone, with, oh, this activity is actually inviting me to talk to someone. To me, that's one of the most overlooked responsibilities of a community organizer or a group of organizers. Their job isn't just to fill a room with people, it's to design an environment where those people have the best possible chance of becoming a community. So, if psychological safety helps explain why people might hesitate to approach a stranger, we can now ask another question. If we know that hesitation exists, whose responsibility is it to lower that barrier? Is it entirely up to each person to become more confident? Or should the event itself be designed in a way that makes taking that first step easier? One person who approaches that question from an interesting angle is organizational psychologist Roger Schwartz. Back in 1994, he published The Skilled Facilitator, a book that's become one of the foundational works on facilitating meetings, workshops, and organizational discussions. At first glance, that might not sound particularly relevant to community events. I mean, after all, he's talking about boardrooms, not really cafes or meetups or anything like that. But Schwartz doesn't really describe a facilitator as someone who simply organizes an event, but instead, he describes them as people who help other people interact. Think about that for a moment. When we think of an organizer, we usually picture someone booking the venue, sending out the invitations, organizing the food, drinks, setting up the tables or the chairs, and making sure that everything starts on time. And yeah, all of those things are important, but Schwartz argues that once everyone has actually arrived, the real work begins. A facilitator watches what's happening in the room, who's participating, who hasn't spoken yet, if someone is dominating the conversation, is someone sitting quietly with something valuable to contribute, are people actually engaging with one another? Now let's step outside the meeting room for a second and come back to community events. Isn't the challenge surprisingly similar? You have a room full of people, a shared reason for bringing them together, and the hope that meaningful conversations will happen. But hope isn't really a strategy. If everyone naturally gravitates toward the people they already know, then simply opening the doors and hoping strangers will magically start talking probably isn't enough. That's why I think community organizers can learn something from facilitation. Maybe their role isn't just to organize an event, maybe it's to facilitate connections. By thoughtfully removing some of the friction that stops conversations from happening in the first place. Maybe that's a volunteer activity that gives strangers a reason to interact. Maybe it's conversation prompts on each table. Maybe it's simply noticing that someone has been standing by themselves for 10 minutes and helping them feel welcome. None of those things guarantee a friendship, but they all increase the chances that one might begin. And if the purpose of a community event is to help build community, then I think helping those first conversations happen is an optional extra. It might actually be one of the organizer's most important responsibilities. What's interesting is that this idea keeps appearing in completely different fields. In 1954, psychologist Gordon Allport published The Nature of Prejudice, introducing what later became known as the contact hypothesis. One of his key arguments was that simply putting people together isn't enough. The conditions under which people interact matter. More than 50 years later, Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein arrived at a surprisingly similar conclusion from behavioral economics. In their 2008 book Nudge, they showed that small changes to an environment can significantly influence people's behavior without forcing anyone to do anything. Then there is the idea of affordances, introduced by psychologist James Gibson in 1979 and later expanded by Donald Norman in The Design of Everyday Things. Their work explores how good design naturally invites certain behaviors. And that's the common thread running through all of these ideas. The environment matters. The way we design a social event influences how people behave within it. So perhaps we shouldn't expect meaningful conversation to happen by accident. Perhaps we should start designing events where those conversations are more likely to happen in the first place. Now, as you probably heard in my academic spiel there, a lot of researchers and academics basically support what I'm saying, which is that the role of the environment of the facilitators, the organizers, is significant here. In this space, the role of facilitating conversation, of letting people meet others without the perceived risk of failure, of embarrassment. Uh, these are actual like researchers that say this. It's not just Disney coming on camera saying this. So the moral of the story here is let's make better events. Let's have icebreakers. Let's have these particular um, mechanisms of meeting new people. If you're an organizer or if you know organizers, who you can suggest it to. Of course, there's other elements which we didn't cover here. I'm gonna quickly want to mention them. Not all events have to have things like loud music in the back that don't facilitate conversation. The whole thing of like, what did you say? I can't hear you. And not everything has to be, a party of that sort. If the intent is for people to meet each other and socialize and create like better ties within the community. So I think that's also important. That ties back to the environment and how important it is to kind of set the right environment to facilitate those types of interactions. But nonetheless, this marks the end of this episode. I would like to thank you for joining me once again. Please follow if you haven't already, like the video, share it with your friends, comment if you can, and see you next time on the Third Place Podcast.